This video is based on my new book, God, Mind, Family, The Human Mind, Behavior, Symptoms, the Family, Society, Politics, and God's Kingdom Explained. It's available free on my website, robertensor.com, and you can also buy it from Amazon in ebook and paperback formats via the links in the description below. An annoying thing about society is that a lot of people need an outgroup, an enemy, an opponent, a scapegoat, someone to other and blame for the society's problems in order to generate sufficient fear and loathing to hold the society together, especially when the society is placed under stress or faces some existential threat. So, yeah, society is to some extent built on fear and hatred of the other. This has always been the case. The French philosopher and social anthropologist René Girard went so far as to say that desire is mimetic, that people want things not because they really desire them in and of themselves, but because we see someone else wanting them. There is a model whose desire for an object is imitated by others. In other words, psychological conformity, more than purely biological urges, creates and fuels desire. That's Girard's argument. There is undoubtedly some truth in this idea, especially with regards to materialistic aspirations, which have been blown out of all proportion in the West by advertising. Sexual desire is definitely innate, but can be exaggerated by mimesis. For example, the Beatles were not really that charismatic. When they reached a certain critical mass of popularity, people just jumped on the bandwagon. Girard wrote that mimetic desire had its advantages, but resulted in zero-sum games because the most desirable resources, food, money, mates, land, social status, are often limited, leading to conflict and the desire for violence, which grows so strong that it must find an outlet. Girard posited that violence could not be avoided altogether, but it could be diverted onto a different, more vulnerable object. According to Girard, the solution people historically came up with to prevent anarchy was to divert the blame onto one scapegoat who is sacrificially killed. Thus, the sins of all are projected onto one victim. The murder of the victim normally carries a low to no risk of vengeance. That is the main criterion for the selection of the victim. Thus, the victims were normally animals, and when they were human, they were marginalized or disenfranchised in some way. Foreigners, prisoners of war, children, or the king, who is paradoxically isolated by his power. The scapegoat actually plays an important role in maintaining the social order, substituting for the whole community, which Girard thought would erupt in violence without a patsy. Girard believed that the importance of the victim for social cohesion meant that the scapegoat was sometimes perceived as divine. He wrongly thought this was how religions emerged. Girard called this process the scapegoat mechanism. Girard noticed that the Bible is on the side of the victims, Christ, his precursors, and disciples, and negatively portrays the persecutors. The Bible thereby flips the narrative perspective of mythologies, which typically position the victim who was killed as the villain, the guilty party, in order to unify the community against them. An example of this is the Romulus and Remus legend, which positions Remus as the transgressor and Romulus as the hero. History is written by the victors. Girard hoped that by pointing out the total innocence of the victim and revealing the injustice of the scapegoating mechanism, the Bible might enable a society that does not rely on sacrificial victims to hold it together. Girard identified the Eucharist as the ultimate non-violent sacrifice, involving as it does the eating of a piece of bread and the drinking of some wine, and a marked improvement from ancient human and animal sacrificial cults. He was right about that one. The French anthropologist posited that modern society did not need to sacrifice so much because the judicial system was sufficiently advanced and handled the danger of vendetta more efficiently than ancient sacrifices by having the state take a controlled and legitimized form of revenge on the perpetrators. But if we pick at this thread, the Girardian tapestry begins to unravel. Ancient Greece, Egypt, Israel, and Rome all had sophisticated judiciaries, but sacrifice was nonetheless central to all four societies. The truth is that sacrifice served other roles beside diverting the desire for vengeful and envious violence. The Bible's sacrificial typology is worth enumerating in this connection. In Genesis, Abel was a shepherd, and Cain tilled the earth. Abel's offering to God was accepted, and Cain's was not, because Abel's sacrificial offering was a sheep, a living animal with blood, which foreshadowed Jesus the Lamb. Cain took it personally. His envy drove him to kill Abel. Girard believed this was because, unlike his brother, Cain lacked a proper sacrificial outlet for his rage. Abel was thus the archetype or first instance of the human sacrifice. Abraham was willing to kill his son Isaac when God told him to because he believed God would resurrect his son. At the last moment before Isaac was slaughtered by his father, Yahweh's angel told Abraham to refrain from killing his son. Abraham killed a ram instead, again foreshadowing Jesus the Lamb's sacrificial death. Symbolically, the firstborn son of God, who was given as a substitute for the firstborn of Adam because the patriarch was willing to obey God. God promised Abraham that through his offspring the world would be blessed, and the Hebrew word for offspring, zerah, can also mean seed or descendant. Thus Jesus, a distant descendant of Abraham, took the place of the patriarch's offspring Isaac, who was also conceived by miraculous means. He was born of a 90-year-old mother, Sarah. Jacob stole a blessing from his hairy brother Esau by wearing goatskin so that he would feel like Esau to their blind father Isaac, who gave the blessing and identified his sons by touch. The skin was taken from goats killed by Jacob's mother Rebekah, another instance of a sacrificial animal averting misfortune in the form of a curse while enabling a blessing. Then we come to the ritual animal sacrifice of the Mosaic covenant, particularly the Passover lamb, whose blood smeared on the doorposts and lintels of the Israelites' houses protected their firstborns from Yahweh when he went abroad slaughtering all the other firstborns in Egypt. The paschal lamb was also ritually eaten by the Jews, and thus they took the innocent creature whose death protected the community and made its flesh a part of themselves, conferring a kind of atonement by proxy upon them. Although Girard is partially right in his analysis of the scapegoat mechanism, the primary reason for animal sacrifice is elucidated in Leviticus 17:11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by reason of the life. In other words, the life or spirit is in the blood of a creature. The sins of the society engendered a blood price that had to be exacted to satisfy the demands of justice, a life for a life. And the offering of the sacrificial animal's blood on the altar to Yahweh was a substitution for the Israelites' own blood being shed for their own sins. The animal sacrifice among the ancient Israelites was intended as atonement for sins not punishable by the law and illegal sins not caught by the justice system, which generally outnumber those which are prosecuted. In a pre-Messianic society, animal sacrifice was a means of propitiation for sin, a form of discipline imposed by God, and a foreshadowing of Jesus the Lamb. Mosaic animal sacrifice was never meant to be ideal and was always intended to be superseded by a superior solution. In the incarnation of the Christ, his sacrificial death on the cross, and the new covenant of his blood, which enables eternal life and the forgiveness of sins for those who consume it, we have the antitype, the culmination of the typology. By drinking the blood of one who has atoned in full for all sin, you also atone by proxy and incorporate his life into the bargain. Saved Christians have no need of any other scapegoat or false enemy to expiate or project their sins, because they have already been forgiven. The tech billionaire and venture capitalist Peter Thiel, in his 2014 book Zero to One Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future, identified an interesting psychological dynamic among founders, unique individuals who challenge conventional wisdom and embark on important enterprises. Thiel believes that these founders can seem strange or extreme, but that they are necessary to bring new ideas and products into existence. Thiel posited that founders are generally born different and are therefore perceived as different by the people around them, which makes them even more different than they were before, in a feedback loop. The mechanism here is a self-fulfilling prophecy, the power of the belief I'm different to actually make the individual even more different, especially when that is the feedback he's consistently getting from others. While this dynamic can make the founder's company radically different from its competitors and lead to significant innovations, we must remember that self-fulfilling prophecies not only dominate families, businesses, and societies, but the lives of individuals and their behavior too. This kind of self-fulfilling prophecy feedback loop applies to everyone and every trait. For example, if someone is thought of as being emotionally unstable, their family and friends will be more careful or perhaps provocative around them, eliciting more emotional behavior in another self-fulfilling prophecy. If a child is considered to be really very smart, many will treat them as if they were a prodigy, making the child more likely to live up to their reputation by doing homework and playing chess. Thiel also noted that the most successful individuals, businesses, and countries are optimistic about the future and believe they can build it. This is at least partly attributable to the self-fulfilling prophecy effect. Being socially fused was far less hazardous in the 60s when the psychiatrist Murray Bowen was theorizing than it is now because the society was healthier overall. As societies regress, the dangers of social fusion increase. So, social fusion is emotional over identification with the society, its trends and customs, which basically makes people too conformist. Nowadays, to be a socially fused conformist is to automatically download every trendy mind virus going from politically correct ideology to low carb diets. People may well ask, how do we know a belief is positive or negative? Limiting or liberating? Well, as Jesus said, judge a tree by its fruit. You don't get bad fruit from a good tree or good fruit from a bad tree. That is, judge a person, idea, or belief by its real world effects. Have social trends of the last 70 years improved society? No, as Bowen observed decades ago, the pattern has been one of regression in the West, increased divorce rates, rising rates of chronic disease and psychological disorders, and lower self-reported happiness even if the crime rate has decreased or stabilized since the 90s and the overall life expectancy has risen slightly with an international dip during the pandemic. So many people are sick now because society is sick as a result of the mass adoption of wrong or harmful beliefs about health facilitated by the internet. If thinking in normal ways makes people miserable and ill, don't think normally. Obesity and toxic modern junk food are often blamed for a lot of chronic illnesses, but worrying about what you eat is far more dangerous and leads to fat gain and related diseases via the nocebo effect. People expect to gain fat by eating certain foods, so they do because of their beliefs engendered by reading health-related articles and by expectations derived from their parents' body type. I made myself very ill by fearing various foods, which I thought I was intolerant to. At one point, I got bad reactions every time I ate those foods. Eventually, I wound up unable to consume anything except boiled water, almond milk, cucumber, and melon. I recovered when I stopped fretting about food and just ate what I wanted. Eat what you like within reason, just stop when you're full. All things are indeed clean was written of food, and that's a verse from Romans 14:20. So what are we to do about the dangers of social fusion? Well, Murray Bowen was right that one should differentiate oneself from society. This can be done by changing the beliefs that engender that fusion, especially fitting in is all important and being excluded or unpopular is the worst and must be avoided at all costs, through understanding the detriments and dangers. Union with Christ is the best way to immunize oneself against mind viruses stemming from a fallen world and a decaying society. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was wrong about a lot of things, but his observations of the herd are sometimes insightful. For example, his description of the comfortable, conformist, safety-obsessed society of the last man in Thus Spake Zarathustra undeniably contains an element of truth about modern society. No shepherd and one herd. Everybody wants the same. Everybody is the same. Whoever thinks otherwise goes voluntarily into the madhouse. Where Nietzsche went astray was in ascribing the irrational herd instinct to Christianity, because Christianity is true, or rather Christ's teachings in the Bible are true, and the organized religion that developed around them is largely correct with some flaws, misinterpretations, and inaccuracies. If your group's beliefs and norms are built on the truth, if the group is always right and the crowd really is wise, then conformity and obedience to authority is actually good. But in practice, this is seldom the case in our current era, and therein lies the problem. The Nietzschean ideal of the Übermensch, a sovereign and supremely creative individual, revaluing all moral values and being completely independent of all hitherto established moral codes, law tables, and outside influences, is an impossibility that contributed to Nietzsche's madness. There are objective moral values because God created them and put them in our consciences and laid them out for all to see in the form of the Ten Commandments and Jesus' two commandments. Nietzsche's attempt to deny that objective morality not only drove him mad, it has driven the West mad. Throughout his writings, Nietzsche evaluated concepts by the following yardstick: an idea is good when it tends to health, and an idea is bad when it leads to decadence. He defined decadence as the process of social decay whereby natural, healthy instincts are replaced by self-destructive or conflicted instincts. By his own standard, then, Nietzsche's ideas are bad since they have unquestionably led to decadence, and they ruin not only his own health, but the health of Western society to the degree that they have been accepted. As Nietzsche sank into the dark waters of insanity, he called himself Dionysus, clearly revealing the demonic origins of his psychosis. When in 1889 he saw a horse being whipped by a driver in the streets of Turin, he threw his arms around the horse's neck, sobbing. He collapsed physically and mentally. People are sheep-like insofar as they must be led by something or someone else. This is an inescapable fact. That's why they're called sheep in the Bible. Humans do not have free will, defined as the ability to choose between competing courses of action independent of fate. People only have free will in the sense that they may choose whether to obey or disobey God. This is abundantly obvious from everyday behavior, which furnishes many examples of disobedience. Our choices and lives are predestined, but according to our will, that is what we truly and deeply want, even if that sometimes differs from our conscious intentions. And what we really want is predestined. That is how the Bible was and will be able to predict so many events in exact detail. Typically, people are dominated by their base desires and negative emotions, but only because they allow themselves to be. Even nonconformists, a relative term, and the highly differentiated, are swayed by factors other than their own ego, albeit to a lesser extent than the majority. The trick is to pick the right beliefs and be led by the Good Shepherd, not an incompetent shepherd, a wolf in sheep's clothing, or the bleatings of a sheep. In God's kingdom, the leader and main mimetic role model will be Jesus himself, a former innocent victim, and those who are punished will actually be the chief evildoers and enemies of the human race, the Antichrist, the false prophet, and eventually Satan, all of whom will be thrown in the lake of fire. The goats in the parable of the sheep and the goats are sinners, justly scapegoated by God in the judgment, demonstrating the role reversals of one, Christ, from unjustly judged sacrificial lamb to perfectly just judge, and two, sinners, from unjust judges of Christ and other innocent victims, including the martyrs, to being the rightful recipients of divine vengeance themselves. When God's kingdom comes with power, the social order will be transformed to the correct meritocratic state of affairs. Many who are first will be last, and the last will be first.